Hi everyone, I'm your host Matt Salem, and you've tuned in to another episode of Our Best Behavior, brought to you by Behaviorally. We are the global digital-first leader in defining and diagnosing human behavior to help you achieve the most valuable moment in marketing, when a purchase transaction occurs. We are Behaviorally, the transaction experts. Each episode, we share insights on trending topics within our industry and of interest to our customers. Today, we're fortunate to be joined by Theora Zulka, Consumer Marketplace Insights, Sweet Earth and Strategy at Nestlé to discuss the chapter Evolution versus Revolution in our complimentary ebook. Hopefully, you've seen it out there. It's called The Power of Packaging to Drive Shopper Growth. And what it does is compile over 50 years of best practice learnings into an inspirational and practical guide on creating effective pack designs. This year, we launched a revised edition with a bonus chapter around packaging for e-commerce. So to celebrate that, we are lucky enough to have Theora here with us. Theora, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So I've mentioned the podcast to you a couple times because we've had a number of lovely conversations over the years. I would really appreciate if you could just say a little bit about yourself so that our listeners can get to know you a bit, not as well as I know you perhaps on the professional front, but just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Obviously, Theora Zulka, work in the Consumer Marketplace Insights group at Nestlé. I've been there for about 5.5 years. And then prior to that, I've had a history in sports marketing. I've been a brand manager for a small regional brand, worked in nonprofit organization, and then prior to Nestlé was with Nielsen for I think collectively 12 years. So have a varied experience in traditional marketing, sports marketing, which is super fun, and then the CPG industry.
Excellent. So today we are here to talk about evolutionary versus revolutionary design. And this is always a piece of subject matter that I find super interesting. And Theora, I was hoping you could kind of clue us into how you think about evolutionary versus revolutionary design. When you have an existing brand, is there a playbook? Is there kind of a specific order that you go through? Like, hey, check this box, we need evolutionary. Check that box, we need revolutionary. How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Matt, and I wish it were that simple, right? That would have been fantastic to have earlier in my career when I made lots of mistakes, but you just kind of learn and you go. There's a couple of metrics that I kind of think about when we embark in evolutionary or revolutionary. One is sales. Are you doing well or not? And if you are doing well, what is in support of that? If you're not and you decompose it and packaging is an issue, that's something to understand. And then, we can go into a little bit more further detail. The other thing is the equity component. And as you get really strong on what you want to be as a brand, your point of distinction in the marketplace, what you stand for, is your packaging in support of that, right? So it's all about what you're standing for as a brand. Does the packaging work? And then the other thing is it actually flying off the shelf? And is your packaging doing service for that particular component? And then that's when you sort of get into this place of evolution versus revolutionary. The other thing I would say is, do you have something that you own, and how much risk do you have in making those changes? And is the risk worth the reward that you would get on the back end of it? So something to evaluate. So we've had stronger brands within my career that I would say, if it has ownable assets, we evolve depending on the objective that we want to achieve with the growth. If there's something that we have relatively low risk, we don't have ownable assets, we're a baby brand in the marketplace, you have a little bit more runway and permission to do something with it, hence being a little bit more revolutionary without the high risk component that you would with a legacy brand.
That makes a lot of sense. And as you're saying that, the other piece I'm thinking about here in my mind is the design team, right? So as you partner with your design team internally, say you have scoped this out, or better yet, I should ask, do you sit with them at all to help that decision, or is the decision coming from marketing and research, and then are you working with them to have some guidelines and guardrails around what evolution or revolution should look like?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, right? I think as a brand, you pretty much figure out what you need to do, unless you are starting from scratch and you need a little bit more partnership and lean in from the design agency. But generally, the brand will have a point and position of, hey, we're trying to light touch this thing, and there's a little bit of little components that we really want to tweak along the way, or is it something we're swinging for the fences and we really need to cue something different in the marketplace? Providing your design team with that type of direction in the beginning is the first step to success, right? Clarity of what you're trying to achieve versus giving them too much of a wide cast of the particular net and asking them to take ownership in that as well.
What about scenarios where you have perhaps an innovation, say, that you're bringing to the marketplace, a new item, but that's leveraging some equity from an existing brand? So let's say there's a new Coffee Mate product coming to market, just for example. How do you think about the revolutionary components that could perhaps help differentiate it, or do they in fact have to be revolutionary versus those guardrails of maintaining that equity that you mentioned earlier on? Is the process there a bit different than when you're thinking about an established brand?
I mean, that's a really good point, probably, right? Because if you're breaking out and doing some type of innovation and continuing to hold on to the brand equity component, there is something to that, right? Like you need to have some bridge, some walk steps from where you are today to where you want to be with that innovation product. And it also depends on, what are the steps from existing today and innovation tomorrow. So if something is like a little bit more of an extension, then you want to be closer in. There's not breaking the system. But if you are pushing out and you're truly doing breakthrough innovation and queuing something either in the category or outside of your category, then you're going to have to break a couple of the norms that you would normally do with your existing packaging. So totally fair question. I guess it really depends on how much are you pushing this innovation and how much difference you really need to queue.
That makes a lot of sense. When I think about what can drive the need for design to be evolutionary or revolutionary, in part, it's going to be obviously, and in large part, the strategy, right? And the business
Mm-hmm.
case and the business need. But then you're also going to need that consumer viewpoint, right? To help validate the strategy, validate if the need is a real consumer need. And you might have a hypothesis going in, you want to conduct research in order to verify that. So tell me about that mix if you can, Theora, and more so on the consumer side when you think about evolutionary design and revolutionary design. Is there kind of a high level process that you like to have from a consumer involvement perspective? Do you think about conducting any type of discovery research to help inform that decision up front, or perhaps there's other avenues that you take consistently when you're entertaining that type of question?
Yeah, I think I know what you're going for, Matt. So you can tell me if I've gotten the question completely wrong or not. Here we go. It was my favorite answer. It depends, and it
It
depends
depends.
on it
You
depends.
stole
Like
my favorite
favorite
answer.
answer. I think the biggest thing that I think about is like, what do you have access to today? Like, there's some brands I've walked into that have a lot of historical data. They've done packaging testing in the back end. They've or on the front end of all of this, they really understand the consumer. They got really good foundational knowledge of what's happening, so they know what it takes to go from like A to B with the objective they're trying to achieve.
Mm.
There's other brands I've walked into where we are starting from scratch. You are literally starting from scratch, and they've worked, and it generally is with baby brands, and they've worked under the notion that they kind of have a gut feel for what's going on. They have a vision for that consumer so that they can make some decisions. But there does come a point with every brand where you get a little bit bigger and you really need to start listening a little bit more. I can't be as intuitive and internal talking to yourself. So I think, like I said, it depends on what you have. But if you don't have that historical knowledge and a basis for what's going on and what's the path from A to B, then yeah, I highly recommend and doing some diagnostics to truly understand like what's happening today, and then that way you can be very prescriptive and clear to your design agency about what you're looking for to get you to the path of success.
Yeah, and I'm glad you circle back to the design agency aspect too, because it's so critical to have a strong partnership amongst everyone in the process. And obviously, if you're entering into this decision of what are the guardrails for design, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think by nature, and I love it, designers are going to want to push, right, and they're going to want to see how far they could stretch, and it's always great to have that consumer feedback when you're thinking about stretching equity elements from a design, or when you're thinking about stretching into new areas perhaps for a brand, right? And get that consumer feedback with the designers on hand. As we sit here and talk about this topic, are there any examples that are near and dear to you in the past, whether it's now from Nestle and in the past years, or even prior experiences that you have in mind that was something that was either fun to work on or a success in the marketplace?
It was fun to work on, and actually to give you a failure in the marketplace. I think
Okay.
that's always an interesting case study. So this was early on in my career, years and years ago. So I could easily talk about it and laugh about it at this point because of what had happened. But I was a brand manager, and I was new on to the business, and the brand was 100 years old. So let me just emphasize, the brand was 100 years old, and we were in a smaller set of categories, an established category. It wasn't a dynamic one that was constantly changing. It's pretty established. Again, brand was 100 years old. So during that time, the owner had just purchased the company. There was a lot of change that was happening. We were all so excited about what's happening, and we said to ourselves, like, what can we do to celebrate the 100 years, and then kind of note this new change in regime, if you will, this new beginning, and what we need to do going forward. And so we started going through the design process. No official, design document or brief. Really a collaboration with the design agency that was super excited as well. So here we are, people without a lot of research, a lot of funding. Even though the brand is 100 years old, we did not have a lot of historic knowledge on what the consumer wanted, and we just made some decisions. So super excited, launched the thing in the marketplace, and it was beautiful. The packaging is beautiful, the logo is beautiful, everything was beautiful about this thing. Sales started to decline.
Oh.
And it was like, what did we do differently? And this is a brand that did not have a lot of communication dollars, a little bit of what we call shopper marketing today, so more in store, a little bit of trade, right? But things don't fundamentally change too much. It's a 2 or 3 brand category, if you will. And for that kind of impact, it was easy to dissect what the A/B testing was here. Prior had the old packaging, new had the new packaging, and when we were looking at panel over time, we could just see our penetration fall off. And then we did a little bit of like digging into consumers, listening to complaints, things of that nature. And it came about is that they couldn't find the product. Like they didn't understand how they were bridging from what they knew before to this gorgeous new packaging that was on the shelf today. And, that was a lesson for us because it was like we went revolutionary. It was a big swing, but we didn't have a strategy behind that other than we were excited about making a change in the marketplace, but there was no sales objective. There was no brand equity objective. It was like change for change's sake. And there's nothing terribly wrong about that. But when you are an established brand, again, that 100 years old, 100-year-old, you don't make those kind of changes without at least knowing where you are today and then understanding and bringing the consumer along the journey to make sure you validated that to be successful in the marketplace. So I always think about that example as I'm going into new either communications or packaging design. You really have to be consumer centric. You really have to understand what your consumers want and ensure you validate in any way that you can afford to do resource wise so that you preserve your sales and the equity throughout the journey.
So I love the example because it was 100 years old, of course.
100 years old. I don't know if I made that point, Matt.
So is it safe to say that there wasn't a common visual equity element carried over? It was
Not
literally
one.
just, scale of 1 to 10, 10 being most revolutionary and 11?
I wouldn't go that terribly far because we did use some similar colors, but they weren't ownable assets. So like you could look at it and go, well, you used green here and it had green before. And something about the text of the logo before was similar, but so is like when I typed Times New Roman on a piece of paper, right? So it wasn't an ownable font or something that was visually disruptive. So you could say those were threads between the two, but there was such a change. Such a drastic change, which we favored because the packaging was old and outdated. It had not been touched in 30 years. Everybody sat there and went like, oh, we've got to make a change. And change was good, right? The change part was okay. It was just understanding where we were today, what our consumers really wanted, and bringing it along so that they were okay with those changes too. And we achieved like a mutually beneficial journey as opposed to just us internally making decisions and going with it because we thought something was really pretty, and it is beautiful. We just needed to be a little bit more thoughtful.
Yeah, it sounds like a case of maybe, for lack of better terms, where the brand went from design A to design D, and maybe a step to B and C first could have helped you get to D in a way that would have brought the consumers along.
Absolutely. And that's totally fair. When I think about why you make changes in packaging, we didn't take any of those into consideration. It literally was like we just thought the packaging was outdated. we didn't decomp of like, is that packaging in service of sales or not? Is that the reason why we're having issues? Is our equity, components X, Y, and Z, and our packaging is not doing that for us, and that's where we're making changes. There were no clear business objectives. It was really about being excited about something and getting caught up in the design process, and making some subjective, decisions versus having the consumer within that consideration set.
Well, I love that you brought up that example. I mean, we all strive to be perfect, but then the reality is none of us are. So I really applaud you for being willing to bring up that example from earlier in your career. I am curious, what was the outcome? Did you guys step it back in market to the old design? Did you kind of, really hit it hard on communications and media to convey the new design?
Yeah, it was more of the latter. It was at that point, it was a beautiful design. There was nothing wrong with the design other than we didn't consumer validate it. But we ended up pushing more of like making sure all of the assets that we had available to us truly pushed forward this design. We worked with our retailers to have some internal POS to bring consumers back to it, to have them remember where we were. Luckily, we weren't in such a category that was so crowded that we had an issue. It was a 2-3 brand category depending on the retailer, so it wasn't so far off to get them just redirected. We just needed people to like snap to it and pay attention to the fact that we were still there. So there was a lot of like shelf tagging, floor type of display, back in the day where retailers allowed you to make it a lot messier and cluttery than they will today. But yeah, we had to lean a little bit more and kind of like scramble to make sure that consumers saw us before their next purchase decision. Yeah, and the packaging still exists today, thank goodness. And it is like, I'm really dating myself at this point. It's about 15, 16 years ago when this was done. Packaging is still intact today. So, they have time. They obviously didn't die. The brand didn't die as a consequence of it. And they've had time to, reinforce this to consumers. So it's now the new normal. But back then we did have to do a little bit of scrambling to get us to that point.
And is it safe to guess maybe there's been some nuance changes in the past, or is it now at a point where maybe they're considering another redesign and, hey, watch out, we better learn from the past?
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I know that there's a lot of players that are still in place there. So, it wasn't anything that I think anybody's forgotten. Nobody took it lightly, for sure. So I don't think, when I just look at it every once in a while, it looks like the packaging has stayed intact to some extent. But hopefully they would have learned that at this point, hey, again, is it going to do something in service of sales if I change it, or is there an equity component that I need to push forward as in support of anything? And then they evolve versus, having a new person come into place, a new marketing manager, or brand manager, and saying, I need to put my stamp on something.
Right. Yep. So we've obviously been very focused on packaging design, obviously given the subject matter. Mm-hmm. I'm just wondering for you, when it comes to redesign initiatives versus innovation initiatives, packaging is obviously a piece of that, right? There's a lot more pieces to that jigsaw puzzle when you think about either redesigning something for the marketplace or launching a new product into the marketplace. Do you have a preference? Do you have a favorite to work on? Do you like working on innovation more, or is there pain points associated with innovation perhaps that you like working on redesigns and existing brands that have all the equity built in more? Just curious as to kind of what your favorite is day in and day out.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I love innovation for the fact that you really have to dig underneath the surface and figure out what's the unlock. Like, what's the thing that's going to break what people usually use today or what they're used to today, and will accelerate the category, will accelerate the new norm. Like, what's the new iPhone? What's the Swiffer of its time when you think about the mopping category? What's the thing that's going to be interesting and exciting and right for the time and place of the consumer? So that to me is more fun because it's a bigger mystery than just kind of tweaking and upping an existing brand, which is, there's a lot of fun to be had there. But I do like the mystery and the puzzle solving, and then really seeing something come to fruition in the market, more high risk type of things. It tends to be my favorite things to work on.
Oh, cool. That's a great answer. I love it. I do. Well, I really appreciate you coming on today. I'm happy we were able to get you on the podcast episode here. We've had a few phone calls. I'm like, Theora, I know you'll be awesome on a podcast. And, sure enough, you were awesome. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it. And thanks to our audience for listening. Once again, this is the Our Best Behavior podcast brought to you by Behaviorally. I'd like to again thank Theora for joining today, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks so much.